Now,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to join this book launch, How Nations Succeed, Manufacturing, Trade, Industrial Policy, and Economic Development. This book was written by our dear Professor Murat. My name is Chen Yi. I'm from China. I obtained my PhD in Islamic finance from INSEC, Malaysia. Now I'm an academic coach at Co-Progress Education Group, China. I teach DBA and MBA students to write academic theses. In today's book launch, we are honored to have a few distinguished speakers with us. Our first speaker is Professor Gabriel. He is a specialist in development policies, including industrial innovation SME policies. He is one of the leading specialists in public procurement in Latin America, and now he is currently the academic coordinator and professor of the master program in public procurement at UNSAM. He is also a professor and researcher at the School of Politics and Governments, and is a member of the Center for Research on Economic Development in South America at UNSAM. Our second speaker is the author of The Nation Succeed, Professor Murat Yulek'S. Professor Murat is the founding rector of OSTİM Technical University. As an engineer and a development economist, he has taught at numerous universities in Turkey and European countries. He also had been working at the International Monetary Fund and Islamic Development Bank as an economist. So far, Professor Murat has published a number of books, both domestically and internationally, on microeconomics, finance, and financial and economic development. Our third speaker is Mr. Rehan, the director of Kingdom Investment Management. He leads the efforts to work with worldwide partners to develop innovative investment opportunities. Before joining Kingdom Investment Management, Mr. Rehan is a distinguished portfolio manager and equity analyst. He used to manage a $30 billion fund, and the investment returns of this fund performed in the top quartile during his tenure. So far, Mr. Rehan has invested in over 50 countries. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Liu Qiang. He is the co-chair and secretary general of Global Forum on Energy Security based at Beijing. Dr. Liu has been working for the Chinese Academy of Social Science since 2004. And now he is the director of Energy Economics Division, Institute of Quantitative Technical Economics. Dr. Liu Qiang is also a consulting expert for the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific on Energy and Belt Road Initiative. Now let's first welcome our Professor Gabriel. Dear Professor Gabriel, what would you like to share with us about your thoughts after reading The Nation Succeed? Professor Gabriel, you are muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Yi Chen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank OSTİM Technical University for inviting me to take part of this event. For me, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here to present the latest book of the dear colleague, Murat Yulek'S. Secondly, let me tell you that I'm going to express a Latin American view of the book. Certainly, this book helps us rethink the history and of economic development in general and manufacturing in particular in our region. This book is an extraordinary effort to present and articulate a series of strong and compelling arguments to demonstrate why industry was and continues to be key to countries' economic development. For that, the author goes through all the relevant theoretical discussions from Caldor's laws to global value chains, from international trade theories to science and technology policies. But it's not a theoretical book. It also delves into the historical development of trade and production from the ancient world and the Middle Ages to the colonial expansion and the beginnings of modern industrial development. And it also presents and analyzes cases of countries that have been successful in their processes of recent development of high growth and high value-added industrial sectors. And of course, the key to explaining this success is industrial policy, whose foundations are based on historical evidence and whose components and sequences Murat describes with great conceptual soundness and with vast empirical evidence. And as the author rightly says, industrial policy is not simply a tool to generate and enhance growth of industry as a whole or of some industrial sectors, but a strategy to promote development through a structural transformation of the economy and society. And here is where political economy comes in. I consider it a first-order determinant for the conditions of possibility that make the different national experiences succeed or fail. Of course, although Murat gives some insights, such an analysis is beyond the scope of the book and must be carried out on a case by case basis, but it is an essential task. And it is evident to me as a Latin American reader of the book, because we have not so long, but rich history of more than a century of industrial policies and development of productive capacities, but also of failure in the attempts to escape the middle income trap. For example, Argentina, where I live, the second largest and most industrialized country in South America, has had during the 20th century several policies aimed at the development of sectors such as those successfully developed by South Korea or Sweden, as the book describes and analyzes in depth, although with very different results. In the mid-20th century, Argentina created the National Atomic Energy Commission and launched the Argentine nuclear plan, which in principle was mainly oriented to energy generation, but then diversified into other areas, such as medical applications, for instance. The Balseiro Institute was created to train high-level professionals in the area. And over the years, the Commission built 3 nuclear power plants that currently supply about 10% of the national electricity system power, and developed some innovative projects such as the construction of a low power reactor that was highlighted as one of the most interesting of its kind worldwide by the US Department of Energy, and the reactor for the generation of radioisotopes for the treatment of different types of cancer, which would allow the country to capture 30% of the world market. Many of the professionals trained at the Instituto Balseiro joined INVAP a state-owned company that, based on the experience in the nuclear sector, develops complex technological systems, and in recent decades has sold nuclear reactors to countries such as Australia and the Netherlands, competing with the world's largest producers, among them the Koreans, as well as high-performance radars for civilian and military uses, for air navigation, meteorology, etc., and has manufactured the two communication and two Earth observation satellites that the country has launched in recent years. And many of those professionals also created some many small technology companies that are now providers and suppliers of that technological system. Although the development of the Argentine nuclear plant was never completely abandoned, on several occasions, it was temporarily defunded or halted by governments representing mostly the agribusiness sectors, which promote the consolidation of an economy based on the export of products based on natural resources that reject the role of the state to promote development. Thus, the huge effort that the country made over decades and the enormous capacities it generated did not bear the expected results. Something similar happened with the aircraft industry. In 1927, Argentine government created the military aircraft factory that in 1931 designed and manufactured the first national aircraft. Over the decades, the factory designed and manufactured different types of aircrafts for military use that in many cases were among the most outstanding of their kind internationally. Over the years, more than 300 highly qualified small and medium-sized suppliers were developed to provide parts and services to the company, and which acquired the necessary capacities to also supply other industries, such as the automotive industry. However, from the mid-70s, various governments with a neoliberal approach first deactivated and then privatized the company, which turned to an aircraft repair and maintenance facility. In 2009, after 15 years of private management, the company was nationalized again, but much of the capacities that have been developed over the decades had already been lost. There are, of course, several reasons that help explain the failure of these experiences. For sure, there were mistakes and inconsistencies in policy design and implementation, but there is no doubt that political economy issues that prevented the continuity of policies over time had a prominent role to play in that explanation. Certainly, Murat Yulek'S book is a great guide to help us understand the need, but also the complexity of industrial development and the right policies to create and strengthen the entrepreneurial, productive, technological, and state capacities necessary for these processes to be successful. It is up to us to inquire, hopefully with Murat's guidance, why nations fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Gabriel. What you said just now is comprehensive. Thank you very much. Now let's welcome Professor Murat, the author of Nation Succeed. Dear Professor Murat, could you please just briefly talk about your book? For example, why did you write this book? What makes this book very different from others in existing studies? And how did you manage to get this book published in Chinese as a Turkish academia?
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Dr. Bezginski has completed his speech by saying that the book explains why nations fail. So I'll start from there, because that is the name of the famous other book on the success of nations, as we all know, Why Nations Fail. But in that book, Daron Acemoğlu and James Robinson, they talked more about the very macro issues to which nobody can object, which is the institutional structure of nations, how free pursuit of profits could, in an inclusive manner, lead to, let's say, rise of nations. And they were concluding that if you don't design a system that is inclusive, and on the contrary, if you design a system that is extractive in the institutional sense, you cannot succeed. But that book didn't go into more detail about how really success can be achieved. And that book also couldn't respond to many other questions of why the capitalistic system did not result in a better world, in the sense that now if you look at the world nations, we have about 200 countries in the world. Officially, 200 countries are members of the UN. So if you take that benchmark into consideration, that 200, out of that 200 nations, only a handful of them have been able to achieve high per capita income. Very few of them are rich, let's just put it that way. Out of that 200, some of them have natural resources like oil or natural gas or whatever. So let's get rid of those countries out of sight. The rest of the countries which are not rich in terms of natural resources, and even some of them are also rich in natural resources, but those countries are still very poor. Take, for example, Niger, which is an African country, which has one of the richest reserves of uranium in the world. They also have oil, but even that country with a lot of resources are very poor right now. So the question is it only those institutional, let's say, very general development at the institutional level, can it answer our question of why some nations fail and others succeed? And this book was written to answer that question. When you look at those countries, the countries which have achieved to industrialize in the right way, they are the countries which have succeeded, and they are very few, less than 20. So if you look at the top ranking of the countries in the world, the ranking of per capita income, the top 20 countries are at the same time top 20 countries in my book, in the list in my book, which have achieved industrialization. So in other words, top 20 countries, top 20 industrialized countries happen to be top 20 richest countries in the world. So it's not a coincidence that industrialization, but the right industrialization, brings you success. But the thing is, of course, everybody wants to industrialize. There is no country in the world where policymakers argue that they should not industrialize or they should not develop in terms of technology, etc. Everybody wants to do that. So then the question is, how do you industrialize? So that is the name of the book, How Nations Succeed. Everybody wants to industrialize. Everybody has some kind of industrial policy. But as Dr. Bezginski has also emphasized, not every country has achieved to become rich. There are very few countries which have been able to industrialize, and those countries again are the countries that have been able to get rich. So the book also tries to answer that question of how that industrialization can be achieved. So how the right industrialization policies can be designed and how they can be implemented. So that's the main task of the book. So it's not, in a way, the Alice in the Wonderland book, because the Alice in the Wonderland world is a very easy world that everybody can get rich. Unfortunately, the real world is not like that. So we have to answer those more pointed questions, and the book is about that. And how that is achieved is actually, that also relates to Argentina, because the Argentinians, they have invented this nice dance called tango. So that tango is a dance that is made by two people, not one. You have to have two people to tango. So successful industrialization also requires two to tango. One is a good state, and the other is a good private sector, good firms. And the rest is about industrial policies, which is designed by the good state in a very market-friendly manner, but also socially responsible manner. Those industrial policies designed by the good state has to be received by the private sector. So is that possible? Yes, that is possible. And there are therefore some case studies in the last few centuries of how that has been achieved, including today. So for today, we have got 4 successful case studies. One is about Sweden, the Saab aviation case. Another one is about Europe, which is the Airbus case. Another 2 is they come from South Korea. One is how South Korea in the last few decades have been able to create one of the biggest automobile producers in the world. That creating that ecosystem was the result of the Korean industrial policies. So that is a case study in the book. And another one is how the South Korean government, together with the private sector, was able to develop nuclear reactor sector as an exporter for South Korea. Now, from basically no knowledge, no skill, no human capital, no physical capital 50 years ago, now South Korea is one of the 6 or 7 nuclear reactor technology developers and exporters in the world. So those are contemporaneous case studies about how this tango, nice tango, Argentinian nice tango, between the good state and the good private sector can be achieved, at least in practice. And of course, now we have Dr. Chen and Dr. Liu here. Now we have a newcomer to the development world, which is China. But it is a very big comer. It's not like the smaller East Asian countries like South Korea or even Japan. It's basically a dragon, not a monster, but a dragon. Now, China is designing and implementing some interesting industrial policies, and actually they are very successful, very successful. This is my assessment and my co-author's assessment. So it gives me a great pride that this book has been now translated into Chinese, and it is translated by the Tsinghua University Press, which is a top university in Asia, in China, of course, and it is one of the top 10 in the world. So it gives me really great pride. And I hope that the Chinese audience will read this book. It's very important that this book is now translated into the most spoken language of the world. So again, I think I should stop here. I thank the organizers and the speakers, and of course my publisher in China about taking the decision to publish this book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Murat. What you said just now is really interesting. I think that all the students of microeconomics should read this book. Okay, now, Mr. Rehan, it's your turn. I know that you are very distinguished in you have very distinguished experience in investment. So, from your perspective, what are you going to say about Professor Murat's book, "The Nation Succeed"?
Thank you very much, Dr. Chan, and thank you very much, Dr. Kian, Dr. Gabriel, Dr. Yulek'S, for allowing me to participate. I do apologize. I'm not an academician, so my level of knowledge or theory is well below that of the panel. So I will take this particularly from some of a detailed perspective on the book. I do believe this is one of the top 3 empirical economic books in the world, and I think it's incumbent on people in my field, in the world of finance, not only academics or students, to read this book. And I think the depth of the book, when it goes back to the historical analysis of different policies that have worked, that haven't worked, is quite extraordinary. We personally believe the next decade will be the decade of the emerging markets. Of course, China has emerged as a middle to upper middle class nation and has extraordinary technology in certain areas such as renewable energy. China is by far a global leader and is exporting those to the world, resulting in the green revolution. Maybe what I can do is just review the book in its major chapters. And then I do want to put Dr. Yulek'S on the spot, because I do have some pointed questions to him, and I'd love to get his response. So the essence of the book is that industrial policy is key to the development of nations. Manufacturing is key. There are a number of policies that Dr. Yulek'S points out, which is to nurture, it is the role of the state and the private sector to work together, to nurture particular industries, and then to ensure education, which is emphasized, I think, page 172, the over 1,600 years of university development and its impact from the Middle East, the development of mathematics and industrial base there into Europe and Asia is quite phenomenal. The amount of data in the book, I thoroughly enjoy. I've reread the book about 4 times, and I still learn something new every time I reread the book. Maybe what I'll do is start from the initial side of the book, which is goes over to a certain degree the historical analysis, but in particular examines the European experiment starting about 400 years ago. And it compares and contrasts the perhaps first global empire in the world, which was perhaps the empire of Portugal, that covered all expanses of the world once the Americas were rediscovered by Europeans. And it's quite fascinating how Portugal and Spain, although were underdeveloped compared to Venice, which controlled the spice route, Portugal and Spain managed to expand very aggressively, but did not have the same industrial policies as other nations. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the book is the rise of the United Kingdom. And as Dr. Yulek'S points out, the UK was about 2% of global textile production in the 1700s. By the mid-1800s, it was 18%. And this is specifically because of very targeted policy, but also I'm shocked when we go through the book as to the ruthlessness of how Great Britain developed. It basically wanted to expand and use the colonies as a cheap source of commodities. And particularly if we look at the US in the 1760s, or what was then the British colonies of North America, in the 1760s had significant amounts of taxation. Eventually, the Townshend Act, and within a decade later, the colonies rebelled, and a new nation, the United States, was formed. Subsequently to that, Great Britain expanded throughout the world, looking at Asia. Now, the policies in Asia that Dr. Yulek'S goes over was even more brutal than their expansion into North America. In here, India, which was one of the world's richest nations, was reduced to becoming a poor nation because the value-added nature of its industrial economy was taken away. It's quite fascinating how Dr. Yulek'S goes back to the Roman Empire, which at its peak was only a third of the size of India and China. And until 1750, the emerging markets were over 75% of the world economy. Now, for that economy within 100 years to collapse was through policies that were very stringent on it and pro the host nation. So it's quite fascinating how European expansion was, in the past 3 centuries, was quite negative for the emerging markets. In those point in time, whether it was Japan or China, through the Opium Wars, it was highly, highly extractive. So one of the first questions, Dr. Yulek'S, I will ask you is, what is optimal tax structure as one develops industrial policy? From my perspective, Great Britain overtaxed. And the reason for the US Revolution was because of taxation. And I believe in 1857 was when the Mughal Empire, actually the last emperor, was removed from his throne by the British troops. But the British Empire only lasted from the official end in 1857 of the Mughal Empire to 1947, was only 90 years. So if we compare that to other empires, whether it was the Ottomans, the Roman Empire, the various dynasties in China, the Mughal Empire, and the various Indian dynasties, which on average lasted 400 years, the shortness of the British Empire, the rapid expansion and the collapse, for me, seems to be based on over-extractive and high-tax based policy. So I'd love Dr. Yulek'S to respond to that. The other area which I found quite fascinating is that we are in a world where trade barriers are rising. And if one of the reasons why Dr. Yulek'S explains manufacturing as key is not only the echo effect of the knowledge base, but also that countries that are strong in manufacturing tend to have a current account surplus versus the current account deficit. Now, there may be certain countries that have a current account deficit that are strong in manufacturing, such as Turkey, if you look here, but their deficit is based on energy imports. Now, that will switch significantly because China has reduced the cost of renewable energy to the point that now, within the next 30 years, renewable energy will be the prevalent electricity source, and hence there will be a lot of shifts between the economies of countries that, as you pointed out, the current account surplus is based on energy or commodities versus manufacturing. What I do want to ask, the second question to Dr. Yulek'S will be, if all countries export, it's a zero-sum game. So there will be some winners and losers. How does that work? Your industrial policy can only work for half the world. Technically, if half the world was in surplus, the other half of the world will be in a deficit. So how does this play out in a world where there's increasing barriers to trade and where every country wants to become more export-oriented? Then is it effectively a race to the bottom? And do these trade wars that are now emerging over the past 5 years, do they get exacerbated? And how does Dr. Yulek'S views that a current account surplus, manufacturing, export, education, value added, how does that apply when everyone goes for the same policy? So if we do look throughout the book, there's just too much information here. It's too rich, and it's a phenomenal text. Perhaps I'll leave it over back to Dr. Yulek'S so he can answer those 2 questions that I had.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rehan. What you said just now was excellent, and your perspectives are very interesting. Now, I'm very curious about what is Dr. Liu Qiang going to say about the Nation Succeed. So, dear Dr. Liu, could you please share with us your comments about the Nation Succeed? Dr. Liu Qiang, we cannot hear you. Dr. Liu, I think, okay.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
Is it okay
good,
now?
good.
Yeah, finally. First, I should say sorry for you because my computer has some problem. I don't know what is the problem. Just I can hear you, but you can't hear me. So I turn to my cell phone. And then I should give the congratulations to Dr. Murat. It is a great book. I'm sorry I cannot read Turkish language, but through the translation, I read the book very carefully and find it's very, very good. And I think you will be all curious about the Chinese experience. Yes. For China, we have many stories about this important issue. And how to say, I think, this book maybe is focused on the policy of industrialization. I know this is not mean the policy of factories, but industrializations, especially on the issues how maybe agriculture nation, how it can transformed into an industrialized economy. So I recall that there's a good saying that if you think about these questions, like how nations develop and how economy turn from agricultural economy to industrialization, you cannot stop it, and you must contribute your life to these issues. That's like what we are doing. So for China, I think these issues, we think about these issues maybe for 100 years. I know for many countries, except those countries like Great Britain, America, and maybe some European countries, many other not so advanced countries think about these questions for a long time because we faced a history. We are beaten. We are beaten by those advanced countries, just like China in maybe before 1945. We were beaten by Great Britain 100 years ago, and later by Japanese. And we have to find a route to develop our country to be more powerful and cannot be beaten like that. So, but I think this book give me some answer about these questions. Still, I think it shows the ways how a country fulfill this this process, like Germany, like Japan, and give also some examples from South Korea, from Sweden, and also many experience from Turkey is very good and very meaningful for other countries, maybe to learn from. And I think maybe another question is not how this process happened and how this process fulfilled, but why these countries and why these difference happened. Just like maybe how Great Britain or English people can start this process firstly, and how this industrialization maybe happened in its own way, not by external pressure. So that's I think that's the key of this question. So, if we think about maybe 100 years ago, why China are so lagged, and why English and Europe and other countries so advanced, the economy is maybe only the performance of their culture and their maybe political regimes. So I think if we want to discuss or we want to have maybe another book, it can be a good question. If I just think about this question, if we can divide the nations into several groups, we can have maybe 5 or 6 groups. Like maybe the first group is like Great Britain and USA, maybe some other countries. These countries have the industrialization process very first, very early. And the second group, and maybe the other groups, are following the first group. So they want to catch up these groups, this group, like Germany in Europe, like Japan in Asia, and maybe many other countries in Latin America, in West Asia, even in Africa. So the second group is Germany, Japan, Korea. They are the examples. But
I don't know. Maybe Dr. Liu Jiang's phone is out of battery. What should we do now?
Maybe I can try to use the time to try to respond to Mr. Chaudhry's questions. Mr. Chaudhry asked 2 questions. One is, if I am understanding it correctly, how... Dr. Lee joined. So, okay, I will continue later then.
Come back.
Okay.
Okay, I come back. Some other groups like Slav people, like Russia, Ukraine, and some other another group is Islamic nations like Turkey, like Egypt, and many other countries in Middle East, North Africa, and maybe some special India nations. So
Professor Murat, our Dr. Liu Qiang is offline again.
I will continue then. So the first question of Mr. Chaudhry, it was, if I am formulating is right, the fact that British Empire has collapsed so quickly, why is that? Why did that happen? And did they overtax? So should I continue, or maybe Dr. Liu should continue? Dr. Chen.
Yeah, I'll come back.
Okay.
Okay. I'll leave then.
Okay. I come back some important issues like the experience from China. You know, China had a policy of market for technology. At first, we have two stages. At the first stage, we just give our market to some international companies. We give a market to them, and even we give some SOEs directly to them to interchange some technology. We hope they give the technology or transfer the technology into China. But later we found these companies, these big companies from America, from many other countries, overall it and eradicate all local companies.
Professor Murat, I think you can just answer our Mr. Rehan's question. If Dr. Liu Jiang comes again, I will send a private message.
So let me continue, and then maybe after my brief answers, he can continue when he joins. So one is whether Britain has overtaxed. Actually, the British Empire, it seems, they definitely overtaxed, but it was not a fiscal tax. It was a colonization burden, which basically led to the collapse of the Indian economy and other economies of the places that Britain has colonized at the time. Because Britain's colonization, apparently, just like the Portuguese colonization or Spanish colonization, doesn't matter. It just tried to reap as much as possible for the mainland. But when that becomes too extractive, then the colony basically loses its economy, and there is nothing else to tax from there, official tax or unofficial tax, as I have mentioned. Actually, the North American colonies objected to that, and there is a section in the book which explains the American freedom war in the 18th century was a result of the British colonization and official taxation policies, both of them. As we all know, in the US, there is the Boston Tea Party issue, and now it's even an official party, although it's a small one. But the Boston Tea Party was just a small symbol of the American War of Freedom. But the War of Freedom started as an idea much before that, and it was, as I try to explain it in the book, as a result of the British colonization policies, which are indirect taxation, unofficial taxation, which tried to prevent North American colonies to become an industrialized nation. So the colonial laws, the so-called colonial laws, which the British Parliament enacted in the end of 18th century, and early end of 18th century, let's say, or middle to end of 18th century, basically tried to stop any industrialization attempt in the US, such as the wool law or the sugar law or the iron law or whatever. For example, if you look at the iron law, basically the British law, colonial law, said that the US could produce, manufacture, and export only low-value added iron, not high-value added iron. So it's just like in many countries now, the domestic policies as well as international policies of the more powerful nations is to let the underdeveloped country produce and export tomatoes, as I call it, not ketchup, but the tomatoes. Tomato is the primary good, is the agricultural good. It doesn't command a high price in the global markets, but ketchup is an industrial good that commands higher prices. So the
Yeah, may I interrupt that? May I ask you a rather controversial question?
Sure.
Do you think the global trade policy, particularly targeting China, is an attempt of recolonization or to stifle China's development?
Definitely. America, if I was an American policymaker, I would do the same thing. It's basically the American decision makers doesn't want China to get industrialized. It's as simple as that. And the Chinese policies counter that. The Chinese policies want industrialization, successful industrialization, just like in the 13th plan, 5-year plan, Chinese plan. They said that they want now higher value-added industrialization through technology and through branding. So definitely, the trade wars right now is on the same turf as before. Yes.
So that comes back to the second question. If everyone follows your policies, it's a zero-sum game. So what happens in the next decade? We just have
that is a question I received too many times. It's very important question. So if everybody wants to industrialize and everybody wants to export, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen, but my first answer to that is, fortunately or unfortunately, not everybody wants to get industrialized. It's unfortunate for the unindustrialized nations, but not everybody wants. I mean, wanting, of course, is something, but try to do it with the right policies is something else. As I said in the book and at the beginning of this talk, you look at 90% of the countries right now in the world, they are either in the middle income trap or worse than that, they are in the low income trap. So all countries, almost every country, 90% of all countries, they have failed to industrialize, they have failed to export. Very few countries has done it so far. Which are those countries? Let's look at them. The West European countries, Switzerland, it's a miracle economy. Germany, to some degree Britain, to some degree France and Italy, although they are becoming failed states. To some degree Spain has been running hard to get industrialized. It's very controversial, but Spanish industrialization was the most successful during Franco era, who is a dictator. But he has done a lot. If you look at the Spanish history, Franco was the person who was the developmental leader in my eyes.
In terms, you work at the IMF. There have been studies that show that one-party rule economic development does tend to exceed that of democracies. So I know that
well, there is also, as you know, the big debate about whether the Indian development or the Chinese development will succeed. And so far, the democracy, which is India, is not succeeding. But China is more autocratic, but it is succeeding in industrialization. So at least empirically, there is some negative, it looks like there is some negative correlation between democracy and industrialization. But anyway, that's a big other debate. So basically, very few countries has done it. The good examples, as I have said, is like the 4 Asian tigers, which have been their leadership have been enlightened, let's say, to industrialize the nation, and they were successful. But they are just 3 or 4 countries out of 200 countries. And then, of course, the predecessor, which is Japan. So that makes it 5 countries. And now China is the 6th country. So there are not, Malaysia, Thailand, they are more backward compared to Korea or Hong Kong or China, etc. So not every country, unfortunately, has been able to become export-oriented and industrial-oriented. So that solves part of the problem that anyway, in reality, in a revealed sense, not every country has been able to industrialize and export. But then what happens if every government in the world becomes developmental government, so every state in the world becomes developmental state, so everybody, all the 200 countries have industrialized, and they are all trying to export. But then we are in a much better world, the world of Ricardo and Adam Smith, where everybody can trade with each other, and who is more productive. Just like let's remember what Ricardo and Adam Smith in their, of course, their. I mean, we have read much more than them. We have read them. We have read many other people, and we have experienced much more than Adam Smith and Ricardo. So now we have much more to say compared to Ricardo or Adam Smith. So, but let's go back to what they have said. They gave the example of Portugal and England. And they said the simple example that we teach to Econ 101 students. If Portugal, is it wine, Gabriel? Portugal exports wine to UK, and UK exports what, I don't remember, cheese or something to Portugal. So everybody is better off because it's the simple story, gains for trade story. But what was wrong about that Alice in the Wonderland story, as later some Latin American economists taught us? What was their name? Now I'm too excited to remember the famous economist's name. But anyway, so they said this is Alice in the Wonderland story, because if one party is industrially developed and the other is agricultural, the productivity gain in the industrial country is much more faster. So the terms of trade will progress in the advantage of the industrialized nation. So basically, if the UK sells, let's say, now let's change the story. If the UK sells to Portugal computers, and Portugal sells back some grapes, let's say, not wine, but grapes, 1 kilogram of computer will always continue to buy more grapes from Portugal. So terms of trade will worsen in the disadvantage of Portugal. So it will not go very good for Portugal, but it will go good for Britain, which is industrialized. Anyway,
I wish to correct you. You haven't lately tried British PCs, nor have you tried Portuguese grapes. Otherwise, you would have a different opinion.
Yes, but that's true. But that's another thing, by the way. There are two ways to industrialize. One is to have better technology. The second is to have better brand name, because brand name also gives you power to set prices. So if Portugal creates a good organic grape brand name, whose price is always going up and up and up and up, maybe they may be successful. But so far, for example, Argentina could not be successful. Argentina is one of the greatest agricultural producers of the world, but they have not been able to benefit from terms of trade advantages. So anyway, to cut it short and answer your question from my perspective is, if we end up in such a good Alice in the Wonderland story where everybody is very developed, everybody is very industrialized, then it becomes a productivity competition. And it is good for everyone, because then the Schumpeterian creative destruction mechanism will work. Who cannot produce better cars will go extinct, and they will have to come up with a better technological product. So goes this Alice in the Wonderland story. But right now, we are not, unfortunately, in that story, and we are in a very bad story where most of the nations in the world are very poor, and very few are very rich. And this is actually one other aspect then that could complement Thomas Piketty's book, because Thomas Piketty was looking at it from a very different angle, from a very limited angle. This industrialization story can also enhance Thomas Piketty's story, because why some nations and some regions and some populational segments are poor, they don't have capital accumulation, and the others have capital accumulation, has a lot to do with successful industrialization that Thomas Piketty also has not yet figured out. Anyway, so that would be my answer. But of course, these are big questions that would deserve maybe bigger debates.
Yes, so Dr. Yulek, I know Dr. Liu is back on, but I'm going to leave you two last questions if you could answer them after Dr. Liu speaks. One is, how's the theories you proposed, how do they apply in a technologically advanced world versus a manufacturing goods world, a knowledge-based economy? Number one. Number two, 10 of the fastest growing economies in the world the past decade were in Africa and South Asia. These are very young populations. By 2100, the population of Africa will be larger, entire Africa, than either China or India. If our young people are there and those countries are not developing as fast, what are your recommendations for industrial policy in areas where humanity's young people will be in the year 2100? But I'll leave it at that, and I apologize. Dr. Liu is back.
So maybe we should listen to Dr. Chen. We should listen to Dr. Liu now.
Please.
Dr. Liu, can you speak now? I don't think your computer works well. We cannot hear you.
Dr. Liu's computer. Dr. Chen, Dr. Liu's computer is an American computer. That's why it's not working well now.
Probably. I think
so I
Professor Murat, because now we are almost running out of time. I think maybe you can just answer one question from Mr. Rehan and finish within 5 minutes. How do you think?
Yes, maybe in the meanwhile, Dr. Liu can join us and he may complete. So I'll just interject in a few minutes. Of course, these two questions are, again, I mean, each of them is a conference actually. So I cannot really, I don't have the wisdom to answer them. But I can give in a very short while my, okay, so Dr. Liu is come, but let me just put one sentence for each and then I'll be done. So for technologically advanced world, my answer would be the following. It's an idea that that is already in the How Nations Succeed book, but I'm trying to think and write more about it. It is called the servicification of manufacturing. The idea comes from the following thing. We use the GSM, the phones, and the phone gives me certain welfare, consumer welfare. It serves me a lot as a human. But is it hardware or is it software aspect of the GSM, the smartphone, that helps me most? It's just like asking whether it is the body or the soul that is me. You cannot separate the hardware from software. So the thing that, the concept that I'm having in mind is manufacturing, the definition of manufacturing is changing. The services, including the technological development and technological services, it's part of the industry, it's part of manufacturing. Otherwise, if you call manufacturing only the assembly line, every nation in the world, even the African nations, they are all industrialized. So the definition in the book, in my definition in the book about what is industrialization is very simple. Industrialization is not factoryization, meaning is not, it doesn't mean having a lot of factories, which doesn't have any meaning. It means a capacity built-up process, and most of that capacity consists of human capacity, not physical capacity. To close this, I'll give you my best example, which is iPhone. The Apple is the greatest, is the biggest market cap in the world, is the corporation with the biggest market cap, and actually it's an industrial company. Apple is an industrial company, so the biggest company in the world is an industrial company. But how many factories does it have? It doesn't have any factory. It's Foxconn in Shenzhen in China that's manufacturing all those things. So is Apple, is it a service company? Is it a technology company? Or is it a manufacturing company? My answer is it's a manufacturing company, because manufacturing includes all those things. So now we have this concept of servicification of manufacturing. Manufacturing is much more than pure production, and it is actually another Chinese person who has created that idea of the smile curve. It's Stan Shi, who has come up with this idea of a smile curve. I use it a lot in the book and other places. In his idea, manufacturing is just pure manufacturing, production. Part of it is a very small part of the value chain. So we should forget about it. And the other question was Africa. Of course, Africa is developing very fast, is growing very fast. But what counts is sustained growth, not sustainable. More than sustainable growth is the sustained growth. The volatility is too high in Africa. For 10 years, they achieve very high growth rate, and then there is a coup, there is this, there is that, a political thing, etc. That takes them 20 years back. So what is important there is the right industrial policy. We looked at a lot of African countries about what they could do. The basic thing is, to our understanding, they have to go up the industrialization chain, starting with maybe simple light industrialization sectors such as light manufacturing or textiles. We actually proposed them that textiles could be something that could teach them about, teach their human resources, such as the blue collars, white collars, engineering managers. It could be like a on-the-job training for African countries to step on a successful ladder of process of industrialization. But again, it's a too big a subject to discuss now in the remaining 1 or 2 minutes. Let me just close by saying that in this year's CEPIP conference 2021, which is going to be in October, 13 to 15 October, we have a session about African industrialization. So those aspects of African industrialization, hopefully we'll be able to discuss in October this year.
Thank you, Professor Murat. Dr. Liu Qian, would you like to add some?
Yes. I'm sorry for many troubles to you. One question I want to ask you is, just mentioned by Murat, most of the iPhone is made in China, but are these iPhones manufactured in China? We did the job, only maybe made all parts together into an iPhone, but maybe only, I think, 1%, maybe less 1% of the profit are in China. Maybe 99% of the profit is owned by American companies or maybe many other countries, but not in China. So the way of Chinese manufacture or industrialization is not the best way. But maybe you can see maybe the best performance of the GDP growth. That's true. But the industrialization process is not the best. All workers are work very hard. They earn very little, and we have more cost of environmental protection, ecological protection. It's a big cost. So the target is very important. What do you want? You want maybe a good life for your people, or you want a performance of economic growth, or maybe more powerful of the country? That's the different target. Maybe the best way is that we can unite these targets together. That's the best. Everybody knows that. but we need maybe some. You must lost something and lose something, and you earn something. If you earn profits, that's good. If you earn a good life for people, that's also good. But if you need to give up this, that's not good. So as for your questions, I think maybe you mentioned in your book the industries clusters. Or I don't know what you write in your English versions. The Chinese is the 产业城. That maybe like industry ecology. That's very important, and also the human resources very important. One country needs some good talented human resources. They can do this design. They can design the whole process of industry. So only in that way you can have the most profits in your country and the most benefits in your country. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu Jiang. Professor Murat, Professor Gabriel, and Mr. Rehan, we are out of time now. Thank you very much. Thank you. And indeed, it's our great pleasure to have you all here. The Nation Succeeds is one of the best books published by Tsinghua University Press in 2020. It is also one of the recommended books to read for the members of the Communist Party of China. Due to limited time, I think we will end our book launch today. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.